Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Great show for you today, folks. Every once in a while, I get you guys saying, you know what? We talk a lot of ghosts. We talk a lot of aliens. Tim, let's branch out. Let's do something a little different. And I have the perfect thing today. Jason Hewlett is with us today. He's got a great new book out there that's being released by Small Town Monsters Publishing. It's called The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. And we deal a lot with Loch Ness Monster. We haven't talked about some of the, I don't want to call them the satellite monsters, but we have Pepe here in Minnesota. We've got Champ over in Lake Champlain and Ogopogo up in Canada. And I've always wanted to talk a little bit about Ogopogo up in Lake Okanagan and get into that subject. And I had the pleasure of being able to sit down with Jason's book and go over it a little bit. And I wanted to bring in Jason today and talk to him, especially right before Monster Fest, which is going on this weekend. It's going on the 28th and the 29th in Canton, Ohio. So I want to bring Jason in now so we can talk a bit about the book and talk a little bit about a potential movie that's coming out off the book as well. Jason Hewlett is a former journalist and has been a paranormal investigator for over 20 years. He's the co-founder of the Canadian Paranormal Society and co-creator of the award-winning web series We Want to Believe. Jason is a veteran author with 3 previously published titles. The book, by the way, on Small Town Monsters Publishing specializes in books about the strange and unsolved and bizarre. Let's bring in right now to Darkness Radio, Jason Hewlett. Jason, welcome in.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here to chat about this.
I'm so glad you joined us, my friend. Now, you grew up in Canada, and of course, you grew up in the area around the lake. Is that true?
Well, yeah, I was born in Vancouver on the West Coast. I live in a place called Kamloops, British Columbia, which is in the interior. And Lake Okanagan is in the Okanagan region, which is about 2 hours from me. Mm-hmm. And Kelowna is sort of the main city right on the lake. It kind of stretches from, Kelowna down to another place called Penticton. So it's really close. And I mean, if you grew up in this area, you heard about Ogopogo. Like there's no way to avoid hearing about Ogopogo and other related lake monsters. So it's something I've lived with pretty much my entire life, which is why I eventually wanted to write a book about it.
It fascinates me too, because here in Minnesota, in Lake Pepin, we have Pepe. And I think it's one of those things we kind of giggle and guffaw about. It's one of those nice things that sure we'll make up t-shirts and little puppets and things like that, and you can take it home with you. Whether we run into it or not is another thing. Now, some people have claimed to have run into Pepe. Other people have said, well, it's a nice legend and all. I don't know if I believe in it. What is the ratio you would say of people in your area that you feel have had a genuine experience with Ogopogo and people that think that it's just kind of a nice little tale to tell when they're out in the lake?
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing about Ogopogo is because it is actually one of the most documented lake monsters in the world. And there are sightings that have a dozen people seeing it at one time. And then there's also the individual sightings. So it's been something that's been really well documented. But there's actually, and this is what I found most interesting while writing the book, and while researching the book and writing the book, and then when I joined Eli Watson to film in Kelowna back last May, is that there's almost 2 entities. Like Ogopogo itself is a made-up word for the monster, and it was adopted by Tourism Kelowna as a marketing ploy, basically. But the monster itself is actually based in the West Bank First Legend folklore, and its name is Nsnaha-Itu. And it's a very much, I know, it's a tough one. It was also broken down like Nahatic kind of thing, by the Westerners. Okay. But it's more taken very seriously, and it is their water spirit. And it is the lake itself, and occasionally it will manifest itself into a physical form, which is what people see. So there's really 2 sides to the Ogopogo story, and they both kind of exist side by side, and the indigenous people, they don't mind it, but it definitely misrepresents what it is to them, because a lot of the stories you hear about Ogopogo, about it being this demon of the lake and that they used to make sacrifices to it, so on and so forth, is not what the indigenous people believe. So it's kind of fascinating that way. And I did not know that going in to researching the book at all. I thought I was writing a book that was going to just be like monster sightings. You know what I mean? And it became a very different beast, if you'll pardon the pun.
What is the indigenous belief about Ogopogo?
That's what it is. It is the water. It is their water spirit. It's very much a friendly being as long as you respect it, right? And it's to them, it's a testament to taking care of the lake and conservation and just sort of they rely on the water. So sure, back in the day, they would give offerings to the lake if they wanted to cross it, because the only way to cross it was by boat, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was mostly like tobacco and things like that, and occasionally a little bit of meat.
Okay.
That they would sacrifice, that they would put in the water, not even sacrifice, I hate using that word, but that they'd put in the water to ensure safe travel. Because if you respect the lake, it will respect you back.
Yeah.
But as soon as the European settlers started showing up, they'd see these bits of meat and think that they were like making a sacrifice to appease this lake demon, basically, because they'd hear the stories. And, there was an incident, only one incident of the spirit of the lake actually like literally apparently attacking someone. It was a gentleman who was a Métis settler taking his horses across the lake. And because he didn't respect it, suddenly the horses started getting pulled underwater and he was forced to cut the last one loose in order to prevent himself from being pulled under the water. But in all the years of Ogopogo sightings, that's the only case where anything like that has ever happened. Otherwise, it's just these sightings of something that the indigenous people say you're really lucky to have seen it because it doesn't always show itself. So it's a fascinating story.
Don't you think that
babbling on about not doing the best justice to? It's really quite interesting.
Don't you think that? Okay, so if you're a spirit of this lake and sometimes you're given the occasional meat, though, Jason, don't you think if you're bringing live horses across a lake that the spirit of the lake isn't thinking maybe this is a live sacrifice?
Maybe. Apparently this gentleman, his last name was McDougall, though, he was considered kind of like a player, and he made a lot of babies with the indigenous women, so he didn't really respect them or the beliefs. So some people think, well, maybe he just had his due because he wasn't really being respectful of the culture and the lake, etc. Right? So you can look at it in a couple different ways, but when that's the only such encounter documented of Ogopogo, we'll call it for ease, attacking someone, the odds are that it's not really that inclined, right?
Right. Yeah. I could see that. To me, I guess I go, okay, if we're going to play skeptic versus believer here, if you want to go with a skeptical mindset, the skeptic in me would say, if you want to go from an animal basic instinct mindset, animal sees animal being brought into the water. Look, there's food, and it's going to attack the animal based on, hey, look, dinner is here, and I get it. And that's something, I mean, this is where I think, for the book, and then when people watch Cursed Waters, like the documentary that the book is a supplementary material to, I think that's going to put people in a position, because there's definitely the camp that wants to look at it scientifically, for sure. Yeah.
And that there's these species of beings that live in these lakes all around the world that people are seeing. But then there's also kind of the spiritual side to this story as well. And that is almost how, when you've got the two iterations of this, you've got the Ogopogo, which is like a tourism mascot that people, want to scientifically prove. And then you have, Nsnahiitu, this spiritual being, much like how, though, indigenous people believe Sasquatch to be, right? It's to them, it's a forest spirit, it's a dimension walker. They don't see it as this flesh and blood creature. So you've got these two ideas of kind of like Western scientific materialistic culture trying to view this that way, and then you've got this other side where it's something far more than that. And actually, the original title of the book was No Monsters Here. It was supposed more like that was the title, but it's not as cool as the Legend of Ogopogo. But when I started writing it originally, so that was the thing that I found so fascinating about the story is it's not this cut and dried. You can look at it in two different ways, which to someone like me, who is a paranormal investigator, was a paranormal investigator first before doing any of this, I like looking at the more spiritual possibility of it. Although I know that irks a lot of people who want to look at it scientifically, and I respect that. As an investigator, I prefer to take a scientific method too, and I hate explaining an unknown with another unknown. So
yeah.
I had no idea that was going to happen when I started researching the book.
If I can go on a little bit of a side tangent here for a second.
Sure.
One of the things that was in the book that interested me greatly is, speaking of water spirits, one of the things that was mentioned in the book was that at one point, I believe in that area of Canada, they had mentioned something about Sasquatch being a water spirit, or a story.
No, it was like it's the same thing. It is their forest spirit. So when I interviewed Coralie Miller, who was with the West Bank First Nation, she was using that as a comparison. It's the same thing.
Okay.
If they go into the woods for safe passage in the woods, they too leave offerings.
Okay.
To appease. They call it strunatum. That's the indigenous word for Sasquatch.
Okay.
And they had a deal with Sasquatch too, that Sasquatch used to watch the children, the indigenous people's children, until it started eating them. So the indigenous people cut ties with Sasquatch. And so Sasquatch is like, fine then. But if you come into the woods, you must make an offering to guarantee safe passage through the woods, right? So I think that's how the indigenous belief system works. They're very much in tune with nature, and if you keep nature happy, then it will treat you with respect, and you'll be fine. But if you don't, it won't. And there's lots of examples of humans not respecting the environment and getting their butts kicked over it. So that's where it really plays into.
It's incredibly interesting. You're going to think this is stupid. On the show, a lot of times I talk to people about, or tell people about, I have, they're not pets, but I have chipmunks outside that are somewhat trained, but they're more buddies. They're I have little chipmunk buddies outside that, I sit and talk to, and I feed them, and just they're companions. You sit and you have fun, and you throw them peanuts, and they give you your time, but I don't ever consider them pets. Most people would say they're pets, but they're really not, because they're wild. They're wild animals. But at the same time, I don't ever try to make them pets. I don't try to train, other than them coming up and I mean, they eat out of a bowl that I leave for them, and that I try to get them to come as close to me as possible so that I can share food with them. I don't ever try, and I give them names, obviously, but I don't try to bend them to my will, right? And the idea is that I don't want them to lose their instincts. I don't want them to be domesticated, because I don't want them to get swallowed up by prey, right? But the idea is that you do. I want to be one with nature. I mean, the whole idea is I'm sitting out on my porch, and I want to be surrounded by nature. I don't want to bend it to my will. I'd rather become one with it. I want to go out and be serene. I don't want to, I don't want it to be the other way around. I guess the long part of this diatribe is this. I get the idea of what the indigenous people are doing. The idea is that you're offering in order to assimilate so that you can get along with your environment. The idea of it consuming you is not an unusual one. It can happen very quickly. If anyone's done any hunting or been out in the woods, the idea that it can consume you very quickly, it can happen very quickly. It's just a misstep, and boom, you're done. With that being said, does it seem like an unusual thing to you to believe that? And there's a passage in the beginning of the book where you're talking about being in the lake and feeling that brush against your leg and not knowing what it is. Does it seem far-fetched to you, if it's not in your head that there's this potential spirit in the lake, that this thing may actually exist?
Well, and that was kind of, that was sort of my sort of intro at the beginning, because, this is what I found was kind of neat. So Lake Okanagan, like I said, is 2 hours away. And that lake that I wrote that passage about is Shuswap Lake, which is like, for 2 hours also away from Lake Okanagan. And there is a big belief that a lot of these lakes in BC are connected by underwater tunnels. In fact, there is a lake monster that's spotted very rarely in Shuswap Lake called Shuswagi. And so when we were kids, we'd always sort of talk about, we'd call it. We didn't know what it was called, but like, what happens if you'd run into it? So suddenly I'm on this windsurf board and something does brush my leg. And I'm like, holy crap, like this could be true. And then I did, doing the research that there's Shuswagi and it's like a cousin of Ogopogo, or maybe it's the same creature passing back and forth. So it was one of those things, like I never took these stories seriously, like growing up, because it's a lake, it's a limited body of water. How could something live in there that you don't see it all the time? Where's the corpse that washes up on shore?
Yeah.
But even if you looked at it from the perspective that there's these tunnels, so maybe there is a limited species that's very limited in number, but it's traveling from lake to lake, and that's why you're only seeing it so often. And even the Lake Okanagan itself is connected to the Pacific Ocean, to the Columbia River, enough of these channels. And we have a sea monster off the coast of British Columbia called the Cadborosaurus that also looks strikingly like Ogopogo does. So sure, like maybe there is this chance, right? That there's this flesh and blood creature that can do this. I also like the idea that if it is a spirit of the lake and it shows itself once in a while, for sure, then it's always there anyways. And you're only going to see it from time to time. So by the time I was done writing the book and Eli and I finished filming the documentary, I was a lot more convinced that there is something out there. Like we went out on Dale and Colleen's sailboat, and they were the people that took the picture in October of 2022. And I'll tell you, when you're out on a sailboat in the middle of this very big, very deep lake, your perception of its size changes dramatically, and it becomes very easy to believe that something that big could be in that lake that's alive, and you just don't see it very much. If it's sort of an amphibian or mammalian species, it can stay underwater for a really long time. And in the documentary, Cursed Waters, Eli talks a bit about how he gets really into that in detail in part of the documentary he's talking about. You start to believe it would make sense. This thing will only surface when there's not many boats around, so probably more likely at night. You know what I mean? And if there's a sailboat, sure, it's more likely to show itself because the motors and everything, it'd become in tune to the motors and just stay down. So yeah, I became a lot more convinced that it's real and that there is something in the lake. It was a kind of a change of heart on my part.
You have access to a lot of different cryptozoologists as well that you talk to. Ken Gerhardt is one of my favorites that you got to talk to as well. Tell me why you were so convinced as to what Ken Gerhardt had to say. He was really excited when you were talking about the fact that you were going to Rattlesnake Island, and why he was so excited about the fact that you were going there.
Well, because Rattlesnake Island is believed to be, Ogopogo's home. That's where it's supposed to live, in a place called Squally Point. And that's where all these tunnels are. They kind of start. And I think because that's where like the majority of the sightings take place. It's seen all over the lake, but a lot of them are a good number are centered around there. And Ken put, a lot of good information for it, because he wrote his book, about the Essential Guide to Loch Ness Monster and Other Aquatic Cryptids. And he was talking about, the lake monster belt, how a lot of these lakes where the lake monsters are seen are very, longitude, latitude wise, kind of in the same area. A lot of the lakes are very similar. They're glacial lakes. They're long, narrow, and deep. They all have very much a similar food source in terms of salmonoid fish. So yeah, he provided a lot of good information. I think he hasn't been to Lake Okanagan yet. And I know when I first talked to Ken many years ago, about 5 years ago, the first time I had a conversation with him when that book came out, he really wants to go to Lake Okanagan. And I'm sure that would be one of his first spots he wants to hit up is Rattlesnake Island. So to get to go there was a real treat. I mean, I've seen Rattlesnake Island my entire life, driven past it, and always thought, man, it'd be really cool to go out there, and actually got to do that, which became a good part of the book. So, yeah.
When we come back from the break, I want to get some of your impressions of what it was like to first set foot on that land, what it was like to feel those impressions. Because to me, it's interesting that you grow up there your entire life, and then to actually take it in for the first time and get the lay of the land. I also want to talk, when we come back, a little bit about Eli and another man who accompanied you as well, who's been on television, and to get that impression as well as to how you gear up for something like this. We'll talk about that as well when we come back. Tell you what, we'll take our break right now. When we come back, I want to talk about that. We'll also talk a little bit about an event that's going on this weekend. that Jason's going to be a part of. The guys from Small Town Monsters, I shouldn't say guys or gals there too. By gosh, you're a well-rounded group over there at Small Town Monsters and Small Town Monster Publishing. Monster Fest is going on this weekend in Canton, Ohio. And so we'll talk a little bit about Monster Fest as well when we come back. Jason Hewlett is our guest. The book is amazing, folks. You got to check it out. Also, I wanted to ask you, Jason, the movie that accompanies this, do you have a release date as of yet?
And that's actually what's really cool is it's both the book and the documentary are coming out at Monster Fest. In fact, the Cursed Waters is the Friday night screening. It's which I'm really excited about. So to be able to watch the documentary and then have the book come out at the same time is like it's like a bucket list item. I didn't know it was a bucket list item until it actually happened. So yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Well, you can pre-order the book right now. We'll have the link in the description of this program. The book is The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. Jason Hewlett is our guest. When we come back, we'll talk about what it was like to first set foot in that area. And we'll talk about the men who accompanied Jason when he set out to I don't want to say hunt Ogopogo because you didn't hunt him, but by all means, try to get a glimpse of Ogopogo. When we come back, we'll talk to Jason Hewlett all about the legend of Ogopogo. When we come back on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting, this is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Jason Hewlett. The book is The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. It's available for pre-order right now on Small Town Monsters, and we have the link in the description of this program. Again, Monster Fest is this weekend in Canton, Ohio. The book will be available at Monster Fest, and Jason is stated that the movie will be available for screening at Monster Fest. Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's this Friday night screening at the Canton Palace Theater. So it's the first time that anyone other than the people who took part in the Kickstarter campaign will have seen it. So, and it's the first time I'm going to see it. Like I've watched it, obviously, but the first time to see it with an audience, it's going to be kind of interesting and to get these impressions from people. Wow. As someone who I have a film degree. I did film studies like 30 years ago. So, yeah, to kind of be a part of a documentary that's now showing in front of a whole bunch of people, this feature film is pretty cool.
Does that make you nervous to think about standing in the back of a theater and screening it with people to see what their reactions are?
Yeah, I'm terrified, actually.
Yeah.
There's a Q&A beforehand and then a VIP event after. And it's just like, what if people hate it? I don't think they will. I mean, Eli directed it. He's a fantastic director. I know Eli really well. Working on the documentary with him was a real treat. So I'm very confident that people will enjoy it. And I mean, I've watched all of Small Town Monsters productions.
Yes, they're very good.
And I was a huge fan before I even met any of them in person and did anything like this. So people are going to, if you like Small Town Monster stuff, you're going to like Cursed Waters. So
very good. Very good. Tell me a little bit about, and the name of the film is Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan. Am I saying
Okanagan?
Okanagan. There you go. That's my Minnesotan. I'm sorry. It's coming out. So with Cursed Waters, tell me a little bit about, obviously your vision's in there, but of course Eli's shooting and editing and whatnot. When you're putting in your vision, of course, you've got what you're going to put down as far as what your vision is with the book. How do you merge your vision with Eli's vision when you're making the movie? Is there certain things that you want to put into that movie? Is there certain things that you tell him you would like to see in it? How does that come together?
Well, that was interesting because I knew Eli quite well. I'd never met him before, but he has this Cryptid Campfire podcast. And when I was running a YouTube channel called The Paranormal Network, it became a video podcast on the channel. And before that, Eli had interviewed me when We Want to Believe first debuted. Like he was one of the first people that interviewed us and put out press about We Want to Believe. So we got talking that way and we kept in touch. And became close friends that way. I'm doing like air quotes because we'd never met. And then he reached out to me in January of 2023 because he was coming up to Canada. The Small Town Monsters was coming up to Canada to do On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin, out of Harrison Hot Springs.
Right.
And he had enough time to come up and do something else. And he was doing Mysteries and Monsters at that time. So he wanted to do an episode on Ogopogo. And so he's like, would you be interested? And I had just literally that same week, I think, just started researching the Ogopogo book.
Okay.
So it was almost like this weird synchronicity that came out about. And so everything kind of came together and I met him for the first time in Kelowna in May of 2023. And we got to filming. And I actually did quite a bit of filming alongside him for, he told me what he wanted kind of thing. And it kind of, we just worked really well together and we communicated really well together, and he knew what he wanted to do. And I had like a bunch of my research on it. And I'd actually lined up the interview with Coralie Miller about, so we'll get the West Bank First Nations. I had already interviewed Dale and Colleen about the sighting. And then, so they agreed to be in the documentary as well and take us out there. So a lot of the material I'd already started to put together just ended up in the documentary. And I put him on to Bill Stesiak, who of course is, Ogopogo Quest, and he's been featured on like Monster Quest and stuff like that. So Eli says, very generously that I was responsible for kind of putting a lot of the information forward and helping me. The documentary came together because I was involved with it so closely. So I thought that was really neat. And then I just knew Eli would put it, he's the director and he knows what he wants to do, and it was going to come together really, really, really well. So it was, and he was very collaborative even when he was directing, and he'd send me little scenes from time to time and what do you think? And we talked a lot. And that was like one of the best working relationships I've had with anybody. And we're very similar. Like we are very similar work ethic. Yeah. And a very similar view on the paranormal and cryptids. So it just worked. That's the only way I can say it. It just worked really, really well.
Let me ask you, who reaches out to Steve Culls and brings him in?
I was actually talking with a gentleman named Kenny W. Irish, the cryptopunkologist, and he knew Steve Culls, and he suggested I should talk to Steve because Steve had gone on a Loch Ness Monster expedition that it was part of, I think it was a National Geographic documentary. Okay. And Steve was talking about, he's only in the book. He wasn't in the documentary, but he was great because we were in the weeks leading up to us doing our thing in Kelowna. It was great to talk to him about what he did with Loch Ness Monster and get his perspective. And he's a private investigator and had lots of good insights and very straight shooter and straight thinker. So he was great to chat with. I really enjoyed, communicating with Steve. And he gave a lot of good ideas for expedition. I mean, we didn't have obviously the funding to go as all out with side scan sonar or anything like that. But just to, like his whole idea is find out areas where it lives, and that's a good place to start your search. And of course, we already knew about Rattlesnake Island and had worked it out with Bill Stesiak that he would take us out there to Rattlesnake Island in a boat. So it just came together nicely. So Steve was a great catch. And we mentioned Ken Gerhard earlier. He was the first person I thought of who I wanted to talk to about Ogopogo very early on, even before I knew there would be a documentary component to it. So those are two great people that just really added a lot to the book.
This is going to seem like an odd question, Jason, but when dealing with these different cryptozoologists and different investigators, do any of them talk to you about what potential psychology a cryptid could have? As far as how their behavior, how they may act, where you can start to think like them or start to seek them out, how you could act like them to try to find them?
We never, not, at least not in the sense of, like Ogopogo, because it's an aquatic creature. So, I mean, does it act like a fish? You know what I mean? How would it? Yeah. We didn't really get into that. And then when you started throwing in the whole, spirituality component, well, it'll just do kind of what it wants. If it doesn't want us around, the water's going to get really choppy, and it'll make sure that we don't have very good experience on the water. I know talking with Ken before about just interviewing him for the second book I wrote with Peter Wren, I Want to Believe in Investigators Archive. We do get a bit into that because the book was basically 20 odd investigators in the field, from cryptozoologists to ghost hunters, and we telling their story. And, Ken did get into a little bit about talking about the times you've gone looking for Sasquatch and, just trying to figure out how you would do that and the things you would do to almost lure one out, right, in hope of seeing it. I'm sure but that would be a really interesting topic to get into with someone is the psychology of these things.
Yeah.
You know, especially like the Mothman, like, which is so more this nebulous, almost cosmic being, right? Like,
Right.
are they animals? Are they highly intelligent? Bigfoot to me seems very intelligent.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's smart and it really knows what it's doing, and it's an expert at hunting and camouflaging itself. So it's got to be highly, highly intelligent.
Well, and I guess the reason I ask that is this, and we can bring it back to those other creatures as well, is this, and that is when you're setting out to do that sort of thing. I know initially it's just sitting, watching, waiting, and looking, much like you're fishing. But essentially, when you get down to it, when you get past the point of observation and thinking, all right, well, what are we going to do to actually go and find this thing? If you're treating it like you're fishing, you almost have to kind of get into the head of this thing, right? And if you're not getting into a spiritual sense of, okay, I'm hunting something that's literally the spirit of the lake, and how do you hook a deity? Okay, if not that, but how do I hook something that may be actually an aquatic animal? Okay, if you're thinking from a skeptical sense or point of view, how do I think like it? You know, if it is just an aquatic animal, if it's a hunter predator type of animal, how do I think like it? What do you think it's doing? Does it have actual habits, or does it have actual cycles? You know, does it sleep? Does it eat? Does it do this? Does it perform? You know, is it nocturnal? Does it do this? Much like you pointed out earlier, you know, at night, does it come up for air? Does it do different things? So it obviously has to have patterns, right? So
Absolutely. And I guess that's why, like, you know, what Steve said, find out where a lot of the sightings occur and kind of start your search then. So like that made sense. Rattlesnake Island was a good place to go if that's where the number of sightings are, and it's traditionally believed to live there. You would start your search kind of at its home, and also places where if it's been spotted before, it's probably traveled there many times, right? Hence, when we met with Dale and Colleen, we got them to take us out on the boat to exactly where they had their sighting, because it would logically make sense. If it goes out to feed or travel, it's going to kind of follow that same route, right? I mean, especially if it has an intelligence, any intelligent thing kind of develops habits.
Yeah.
And places it likes to go. So we tried as best we could to kind of, I sort of think, especially given, you know, we shot the whole thing in 2.5 days. So you're trying to fit in right in these spots where past sightings have occurred in hope of, I guess, replicating sightings. I mean, going back would be amazing, and having more time and then being able to go out at night, you know, really would be, I think, you know, a fascinating thing to do, you know, especially like if you've, you know, a little more, you know, if you just, I guess maybe say less concerned with researching a book and filming a documentary, and more just focused on just trying to catch a glimpse of Ogopogo, that would, you know, I think be fantastic. Right. I mean, the one thing from the spiritual side that Coralie Miller suggested, and it did make it into the book and into the documentary, is she said, if you want it, just go down to the lake with a cup, scoop up a bunch of water, and there you go.
Really?
You've got it. It's the spirit of the lake. It is the lake itself. And she says she tells that to every cryptozoologist that comes to Kelowna wanting to catch it. And so Eli and I thought it was an idea I had. We should just go down to the lake with cups of water and just scoop up part of the lake, and there you go. We've got go. And Eli liked that idea, so we did shoot that, and that's right at the end of First Waters. There's a scene with that, and I mentioned it in the book. And I think the last line of the book is just make sure that you pour the cup back into the lake.
Right. Yeah.
Because that would be disrespectful.
That
right.
Would be.
So
yeah. That's very appropriate. Yeah. You know, I was going to ask you the question as to, it's a two-pronged question here, Jason. So I'd ask you this, and that would be, what was the most chilling thing that maybe Coralie or one of the other Indigenous people told you about Ogopogo or experiences with Ogopogo? So that would be the first part. I'll have you answer that. Second part would be, what was the most chilling experience you heard from anyone else about Ogopogo?
Well, personally, like there wasn't a lot of moments that were chilling. I think what came down, especially with Coralie mentioning that we did actually, when we went on the water with Bill, is we did, Coralie and her cousin Kate came with us, and they did like a traditional prayer. Mm-hmm. And we did make an offering to ensure, safe safe passage. And these are their belief systems, and we wanted to respect their belief systems. But at that point in my head, I'm kind of starting to, Eli and I were really starting to like kick around that, Dale and Colleen got a real picture of Ogopogo. Like we became very convinced that they did, which means there's something there. And if it does tie into indigenous folklore, it's best to respect that. So there was a part of me as we got closer to Rattlesnake Island that's like, well, what if, and we went out on a beautiful sunny day that was calm. Well, what if the water starts acting up as we got closer?
Yeah.
Right. And then what? Does that lend more credence? Probably. I mean, it's called Squally Point for a reason. It gets lots of squalls and wind in the area and becomes very tumultuous. So how would we deal with that? You know what I mean? If the weather did get really bad suddenly and came out of nowhere. So I guess in that sense, that was a bit chilling. And then in terms of just stories of Ogopogo, the McDougall story is, the fact that both horses were getting pulled under the water and that this thing could do that. And then being out with Dale and Colleen on their sailboat, and Dale made a really good comment that, gee, I hope this thing, just eats fish, because the speed we're going at, which is sail speed, that's our getaway speed. So if it ever decided, and they're talking about a head that they saw underwater was 3 feet wide, and they could see this neck going down under the water. That's not small. And you're in a sailboat, and you're in 250 feet of water.
Wow.
That thing could easily, I hate to call it a thing, that's being disrespectful, but if it wasn't something if it wasn't friendly, or it was having a moment where it didn't like us being there, we wouldn't stand a chance. If you wanted to look at it from that, not that I believe that would happen, but it's the what if factor, right? Like it's always this having watched Jaws 50 times and just, seeing how things could go. And you're in this small sailboat.
So I know you only had 2.5 days with Eli, but did the conversation ever come up? Okay, so what happens if we do accidentally get caught up by this thing? Do you have and one of us survives, one of us doesn't? Does one go to the other's family and say what happens?
We actually didn't talk about that, but I know us being both filmmakers, it'd be the first thought was we got to save the footage.
Yeah.
Because here's proof that we've been looking for all along, and film it, right? If this thing comes up.
Right.
But we didn't really get into too much of a conversation that way. I think, especially as someone who's a paranormal investigator, I go into a lot of homes and a lot of businesses where people have seen something, and these things aren't always friendly, but you kind of don't want that in the forefront of your mind. You just try to approach it that you're going to go in and you're going to do your thing and everything's going to be just fine because we're taking all the necessary precautions, right?
Well, it's one thing. Okay. But there's levels to this thing, right? I mean, that's the saying, right, Jason?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to go into a home where there's a ghost, where you could accidentally be scratched. Okay. That's kind of piddly. Let's face it. It's another thing to say, well, it could be something potentially demonic. Okay, but you can always call in a priest, right? Okay, so we're dealing, in theory, right? We're dealing with levels. You're talking about something that had a head that was, what, you said 3 feet wide or something?
3 feet, yeah, 3 feet wide. That's pretty big.
Yeah, that's pretty big. Okay, so you're talking about something that could potentially turn your sailboat over, right? And then, something that's dragging horses underneath the water. That's a little above the pay grade, right?
Yeah. I mean, as a paranormal investigator, the worst thing I had happen was get pulled into a door, like pulled physically off my feet into a door when it slammed shut on me. Mm-hmm. That would be a whole new level to have like a sailboat capsize and have this lake monster kind of there. And people have been swimming and say they've seen it. Well, they've been swimming, and there's even footage of a guy water skiing and these 3 shapes coming out of the water, and the water ski, he falls off the water ski into the water. I mean, I could not imagine. I know how I felt even for a moment on that windsurf board and having something brush my foot that I'm sure was just like a little fish or like a, seaweed. But it's, I guess that classic, fear of water would come into that because we don't know what's under there. And if this thing's upwards of 60 feet long, that would be terrifying, I think, to actually see it in those kind of conditions. I know even when Dale and Colleen went by and they snapped the one picture and they were gone, like they just kept on going, right? You don't know. Your brain, I think, can't even process what's happening until it's over, well over a sighting like that. Or say, if you have, especially if it's an unfriendly encounter. Do you know what I mean? I think that would be really hard to put together.
Curious as to Coralie and what the indigenous people do if they come across it. What can they offer?
they listen, like they listen, they make their offering. And if they go out onto the water and the water is stormy, they go back. Like they pay it that much respect. And if they do their offering and it's smooth sailing, they will do their thing on the water. Same in the woods. Like they are very much, that's where for them, that's them tuning into their environment. They respect it.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly. They don't mess around at all.
So
which I think is honestly the smart way to approach anything like this. Like even with Eli and I, if you want to look at it from that standpoint, we went into it with the best of intention. Like we weren't there to exploit anything. We were there to learn more and to tell this story. Like it became very much more about telling the Ogopogo story than trying to find just a bunch of scary lake monster sightings and just do that. So, and that's one thing I really appreciate with Small Town Monsters is they'll tell dramatic stories, but they're not doing what you see on a lot of those ghost hunting shows where they just over dramatize everything. Like that's what's so great about, working with them is that they don't do that. And that's sort of my approach too, is you just don't do that. So we went into this documentary and I went into researching the book with the best of intentions of just trying to tell the best version of the story of Ogopogo.
Which is a good way to be, especially if you want to live for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a good way to be, but there's a lot of people out there where you hear the saying curiosity kills the cat. I know there's a lot of people who would go, yeah, but I really want to find out what this thing thinks, and I really want to know if it's going to communicate to me. And it's the old paranormal investigator wants to communicate with the ghost thing. Yeah, but I really want to know if the thing will actually sit and talk to me. Well, first of all, Ogopogo is not going to talk to you. But, it's the whole, yeah, but I want to get a picture for prosperity and I want to be able to post it on, on Instagram. And, there's this whole, you've got the person who always wants to be the first to do everything. But it's that one thing that's going to end up killing you, Jason. It's the one last act for humanity that's always going to end up killing that one person, which I find amazing that somebody's willing to stick their neck out for that. I want to circle back to, we were talking about psychology and mindsets and whatnot, and you had mentioned Sasquatch, you had mentioned Mothman, and being able to get into the mindset of something that may not be completely human in order to see if you could find it. I want to talk about Sasquatch for a little bit because it's one of those creatures that's a little bit more than elusive. And, talking with other cryptozoologists who have been out in the field who, they spend many, many hours out in the woods. And you see the dens and you see the bent trees and you see all this evidence that this creature's out there. You hear the whoops and you hear the tree knocks and you hear things that are out there, yet you say, okay, but has the thing been right in front of you? And someone will say, nope, I've never seen it. Or they'll say, you know what? I think I've seen it, or I know I've seen it. But again, living to tell about it. I want your perspective. Have you been out in the woods and seen one of these things face to face?
I've been out in the woods. We've done some, because with the Canadian Paranormal Society, we don't just do ghost hunting. We look into cryptids and UFOs, etc. And with We Want to Believe, we did go out and do a series of Bigfoot hunts, gone squatching kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And we did pick up wood knocks on one of our expeditions. We went to a lake about an hour and a half from where I live, up in a place called the Bonaparte Plateau. This gentleman named Mike had gone to every year for 20 years. He goes fishing up there. And every time he's on the lake, he gets to this one part of the lake and he starts hearing these knocks, and it's these knocks that come in threes. And they continue until he leaves the area. So we went up there with him and we got a boat, and my colleague Sean stayed behind because the boat's only big enough for like three of us. So we went with Mike and a cameraman, Marcus. And you know what? And it was true to form. Like we went all the way over there. We don't hear anything. I convinced Mike that for the first time in his life, let's go on shore in this part of the lake and see if something kind of happens. And I go and do some knocks to try to get something, nothing. And we get back in the boat. It didn't surprise me, but you're always a little bit disappointed. And we're going back, and Sean's just yelling, like, did you hear the knocks? Did you hear the knocks? I'm like, no, dude, that was me. I was knocking. He's like, no, not from over there. He's like, from over there. Like something started knocking like on another part of the lake that he actually got on his recorded with his phone. He actually recorded the knocks with his phone. And I think that's very typical of Bigfoot activity. You go looking, and anything in the paranormal, you go looking in one spot and it happens somewhere else because this phenomenon is intelligent.
Yeah.
It probably, you know, if Bigfoot's there, it saw us going over there and it saw us going to shore. So it was moving and it was going to play its little game with us, right? So that's kind of the closest I've come to any real encounter. I've had other ones. I can't say it was Sasquatch, but you know, when you do hear stories where Bigfoot will create this feeling of fear in people, that has happened to me twice in the same location, 20 years apart, at a cabin that we had on the Shuswap Lake, where I'd be out there by myself. And I've been there. I grew up out there. Like I've lived in the woods the majority of my life. And I'm fine. And then suddenly it's like this intense feeling of dread comes in. That's like, I need to leave. And if I don't leave right now, I'm in big, big trouble. And so I just listened to it. I just would pack up all my stuff. I'd throw it in the vehicle and get away. And it would always, both times it happened, it would take a good half hour, like almost driving all the way back to town for that feeling of dread to subside. But it was terrifying. And I can't say that it was Bigfoot, but having heard stories where people experiencing the same thing and actually having seen Bigfoot, I can, and that's Sasquatch territory. All around me, Sasquatch territory. Perhaps it was. I can't think of any other logical explanation why that would happen. So maybe a Bigfoot was passing through the area and it wanted to do something down at the water and it didn't want my face anywhere near it, and it told me to get the heck out. So, but that was terrifying. Those two times were absolutely terrifying.
I'm always intrigued by that because I wonder, much like with human nature, there's good and bad, right? There's good and evil. There's those who have a good-natured side that are only looking to help others, and there's others that will roll over you no matter what. They don't care. They're only in it for themselves. And I really wonder if there's that with these creatures. I don't want to call them animals. I know there's apers out there and there's those that believe that these are celestial beings, right? I don't know what to think of these things. I won't call them one or the other, because you see behavior out of them that look like they could be the most benevolent creatures on earth, that they could just be the most gentle things, you know, wanting to almost be gentle and kind to small children, or reacting the most gentlest ways possible towards animals and children. And then in a flash, turning around and describing what you just described there, this sense of dread around men with weapons or men that are maybe alone on their own, and they're standing between a Sasquatch and a food source, or Sasquatch and a water source, or a Sasquatch and a target that they're looking for. And nothing's going to get between them and whatever it is that they're trying to get to. And it's the exact 180 opposite direction of gentle and kind. And I don't know how to read that. I just don't, other than that's an animalistic reaction. At least in my
It's a primal feeling. When it happens to you, it's primal. It's absolutely like, it's like I said, I've never experienced that level of fear before about anything.
Yeah.
Like I remember, especially the first time, because the cabin was eventually became like a finished basic home on a lake, but that first time it wasn't. So, I'm leaving, I packed up the car, the sun's setting, and it was like this, no, I got to go turn off the pump because you don't want to leave the pump running. And the pump was under the cabin outside. And it took 5 minutes to go around, get underneath the cabin and turn that off and then get back to the vehicle. And that was like the worst 5 minutes of my life, being under there doing that.
I bet.
Like it was awful, and I just can't explain it other than it ties into things I've researched about sometimes with Bigfoot phenomena. And it's almost like, I think you're right. I think with anything, there's good and bad. And even with animals, there's some that are far more docile and others that are a lot more rabid, right? So it could have been that, sure. Like I say, we're on the water. We'd watch bears come down out of the mountains and come down to the lake. Maybe it was time for it to go down, get its nightly drink, and usually we're asleep or there's nobody there. So I don't know, but it certainly, to me, just makes Bigfoot, to me, I can't just see it as simply just like a missed species like Gigantopithecus or something like that. I think there's something a little bit more going on there.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Well, have you noticed, and you know, I've talked to other researchers about this too, this tight connection between Sasquatch and UFO sightings? Have you
That's
seen?
definitely being reported more now. I'm sure all this stuff has kind of been around forever. I just don't think people talked about it. I think like people in the Bigfoot, it seems within the paranormal that people who are kind of in the UFO camp don't want to tie their stuff in anything else, and people that are into ghosts don't want to connect that. And same with Sasquatch. But you're hearing a lot more. Like there's people reporting having like alien abduction experiences and seeing Bigfoot on the spacecraft. Do you know what I mean? Which is crazy. But you're also hearing stories of like, you know, orbs being seen where Sasquatch is, or weird lights in the woods, or like a place like Skinwalker Ranch where apparently everything is happening all at once and portals opening and all this stuff. So I'm not comfortable just trying to separate all these into different categories. I think all this phenomenon is very natural to our planet. And somehow it's all interconnected in some way, kind of how John Keel talked about, you know, this ultraverse, and that what we're seeing is just us being able to, our brains making sense out of everything that's going on around us. So I'm kind of leaning more into that camp, although I know that's not a very popular camp to always find yourself in. But to me, it makes sense. And I think with this stuff, we need to be if we really want to understand it, we need to be as open-minded as possible. You can't just be like, nope, that's it. Like, it's just this or it's just that. Like, you got to be willing to accept other possibilities, which I know I'm starting to sound like Fox Mulder at this point.
No,
but that's
not at all. Not at all. So I want to play a little what if game with you here, Jason. So you have the opportunity to capture a certain amount of evidence with, let's say, a Sasquatch. Okay. So you have the opportunity to bring back a sample of something, whether it be a photograph, hair, or let's go extreme and say a body. What do you choose to bring back with you?
You know what? I think with the way the world is now and the internet and all this stuff, it wouldn't matter what I brought back. I don't think anyone would believe it.
Yeah, I know. That's the tough
The
part.
accusations of it being a hoax. You know what? I could bring back the best video evidence. No, used AI to create it and blah, blah, blah. I could bring back a body and you're like, nah.
It's a ghillie suit.
You just made it up. It wouldn't matter. I remember something that Coralie Miller said when we were talking about it, is if you've seen something, consider yourself lucky. And that's your experience. You don't have to quantify it. If you have this experience, that's enough. Why? Everyone, like you say, they want to get the picture for Facebook and show it off, but nobody cares about that. Nobody will believe you, and it could be 100% accurate. So if you have an encounter or an experience, or you took a picture, that's yours. And who cares what anybody else thinks? And that's kind of where I'm really getting. I mean, I am an investigator and a researcher. I'm going to document it, you know, either in a book or in a film, and I'm going to put it out there. But whatever happens after that, it doesn't matter, because I know what I've experienced, what I have, and that what I got, if I'm putting it out there, is real.
Let me ask you a deeper question. That's this. So after all the different experiences that humanity's had, when does the tide turn that we start to believe the people who have had the experiences? When do we stop being skeptical and start believing?
That's a good question. I know there's some people that already have stopped being skeptical, right? I think, and in certain things like UFOs, it seems like the public at large is very much on board now with the idea that we're being visited by beings from somewhere else. So I think, even Congress, the United States Congress has admitted, yep, there's stuff going on here. So I think we're getting there. I know since the pandemic, it seems like people are becoming a lot more open-minded and a lot more spiritual in that sense, and want to believe in something more than just our average day-to-day existence, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we will get there, but I think it's going to take a long time. I think there will always be people who are going to be skeptical and say, nah, that's BS. But I think we will eventually get there, because, like I said, I think this has been going on since we've been on this planet. And I think we were way more in tune with it back when we were less civilized and relying more on our instincts to live out on the plains or in forests, right? I think we were a lot more in tune with all this stuff. And as we became more cultured and started living in bigger centers and became distracted by phones and jobs and electricity and TiVo and all this stuff, that I think we just lost that.
Yeah.
And when people suddenly now have these encounters, it totally changed their perception of the world. And I think a lot more people have them than that admit it, and they just push it off to the side and they don't want to acknowledge it because it totally screws with their whole vision of what life really is.
Very true.
So,
very true.
I think we'll get there, but those a lot more people have to just stop and start paying attention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Monster Fest is this weekend. Can you give us a short preview of what we can expect in Canton, Ohio?
Well, I'm not an organizer, so I know there's a lot of us are going to be there. Myself, I know, Ryan Sprague from Somewhere in the Skies, Ken Gerhard's going to be there, the whole STM crew. There's the Cursed Waters screening on the Friday night, but Saturday there's STM screenings all day. Like, I think Land of the Missing is, and On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Origin. There's workshops. There's live podcasts, Cryptid Campfire is doing a show. Jim Harold, I think, is I believe is also doing a show.
Yep.
There's a ton of guest speakers. I know I'm going to be there doing book signings. I think it's going to be amazing. Like I'm leaving Thursday. I land Thursday night. I get to Canton in time for the screening, and then I got to leave on the Sunday. I think it's going to be a complete blast, but a complete whirlwind at the same time. But if last year's success is anything, I wasn't there last year. I really wanted to go, but it sounded like it was a great time, and I'm sure this is going to be even better.
It sounds wonderful. And folks, I'm going to put up a link. So again, in the description of this program, get there if you can get there. And by all means, I encourage you to get there. We'll have a link to smalltownmonsters.com so you can get in on the fun in Canton, Ohio. I encourage you to get there because Monster Fest is always a great time. And it's, again, you guys have upped the ante once again for this year for Canton. And it's a once in a lifetime type deal. You guys always put on a wonderful product, first of all, with both the books and the movies. But then when you get together for Monster Fest, you've always got something special planned. So, and again, you guys have Jim Harold coming in this year. So, it's just getting better and better out there at Monster Fest this year. So, it's such a good time, and you guys always put on such a good product over there at Small Town Monsters. So, I expect you guys to have a wonderful time out there. And there's always some sort of announcement that comes out of Monster Fest. You guys always have something announced at Monster Fest that tends to set us on our ears. So I expect.
Well, and this year with STM, I think this is the most content they've ever created in this year. You know what I mean? And it's just, I think it's going to be amazing. And I can't wait to see what Seth and them have up their sleeves for us.
That's right.
I'm just honored to be able to be there.
Yeah.
And to have written a book and taken part in a documentary like Cursed Waters with them. So
absolutely. As Jason mentioned, Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan is going to be screened at Monster Fest. So you're going to want to make sure that you're in Canton for that. The book is available for pre-sale right now. We have a link in the description of this program, The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. It will be available for sale in Canton. So again, get yourself to Canton for Monster Fest to get your first copy of that. Otherwise, get it pre-sale right now. Link in the description of this program. Jason Hewlett, I want to thank you so much for being on the program today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed myself.
As we have as well. Again, folks, the link's in the description. Go click on them, get the book, and we can't wait for the movie to come out. I can't wait for the movie to come out, and we want to see the movie as well. So thank you so much,
awesome.
Jason.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to thank Jason Hewlett for being on the program today. The book is The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. It's available for pre-order right now. At the link in the description of this program. Of course, Monster Fest is this weekend, Canton, Ohio. So you're going to be able to get it there, a real live copy in your grubby little hands. You're also going to be able to check out Jason's movie as well, which is connected to the book. Cursed Waters, Creature of Lake Okanagan is going to be screened at Monster Fest, which I think you all are going to enjoy. The book itself is amazing. Again, The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster. Go pre-order that book right now. Get a copy sent to you. And again, I can't wait for the movie. The movie is going to be something special. Eli Watson producing and directing that movie for Small Town Monsters. They always do such a wonderful job of everything they do over at Small Town Monsters. So again, I can't wait. smalltownmonsters.com/shop is where you can go for the pre-order of that book. We have a link to it in the description of this program. As I said, I know I've beaten it to a pulp by now. We'll have all the links in the description of this program. Again, they just do such a wonderful job over there. Seth Breedlove has everybody running in tip-top condition over there to bring you such an amazing product. So I'm glad we could get Jason on the program today. And again, I tip my cap to Jason for everything that he's doing over there. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend this weekend over at Monster Fest. Speaking of this weekend, again, if you're in the Twin Cities metro area, I encourage everyone to, especially if you're a wrestling fan, go check out Tommy Spider Baby Saturday's retirement matches this weekend. His first one is Saturday over at Northern Lights Wrestling. And I'll try to include some links to Spider Baby's social media pages so you can check out exactly where he's going to be. Sunday, he's wrestling for Midwest All-Star Wrestling. That will be the final match of Spider Baby's career. Of course, Tommy Spider Baby Saturday was the first ever out professional wrestler. Not for me that has anything to do with anything, although Spider will tell you different. But I say that facetiously, knowing he's probably listening. But I'll tell you this much. Spider has always had this aura about him that will pull in every man, woman, and child. And even though he is a villain, a bad guy, a heel, if you want to use the inside lingo, that will make you want to hate him for the bad guy tactics he uses. He does it with a wink and a smile, a little bit of a nod. You've never seen so many kids in your life root for the guy. It's the cutest thing ever. I'll tell you that much. He's going to hate that I even said this. So much so that Ian Punnett, the late Ian Punnett, has had him on Coast to Coast AM. And even Ian Punnett fell in love with Spider. Just because his character is so endearing. It really is. Spider Baby has written under his real name, Terrence Creep, for Batman Comics, for Scooby-Doo, and is a wonderful writer. He's also written articles for The Advocate and other magazines. He's a wonderful writer. He's an even better entertainer. He's got more talent in his little finger than I think I have in my entire body. And I can't wait to see him perform this weekend. I'm sad that I know it'll be the last time in a ring for him. Although you never say never in the wrestling world. It's never the last match for you. It's just your retirement match. And there's a series of 64 different retirement matches you have, much like Ric Flair. And eventually you die with your cold, dead hand around a ring rope somewhere. That's just the way it is. So I'll look forward to this being the first of 64 different retirement matches for Spider Baby. I don't take it as this being the one and only. But I'm looking forward to seeing my friend off this weekend because I think it'll be something else. So I encourage you to come on out with us and have a good time. Have a hot dog and a Coke and just sit back and watch some classic local independent wrestling. Not the stuff you watch on TV, because the stuff on TV is its own art, but the stuff that you watched when you were a kid, because that's what you'll see this weekend. It's good stuff. Otherwise, if that's not your goal, if you've got other goals this weekend, then do at least this for us. Be a light in someone's darkness. Go out there and help someone this weekend. Just maybe give a little elbow grease to someone who's helping out in the yard or doing something out in the yard. Go on and help them this weekend if you can. Or help somebody out with some housework. Help them do something in their neighborhood, in your neighborhood as well. Otherwise, just go out and enjoy life. It's so short. You know, I had a friend tell me today, I don't want to end things on a serious note, but I just want to remind you of the gravity of life. Before we leave each other today, I had a very good friend message me today and said, Tim, I'm kind of down because a friend of mine was murdered in downtown Minneapolis a few days ago. And I just found out about it today. And as I was giving my condolences to this close friend of mine, I was going over the news story. I said to myself, my God, first of all, what a tragic way to go, because it was a horrible, gory death. But then I thought to myself, is this really the way she would want to be remembered? Not by her end, but by the warmth, the love, and the joy, and the good times that she gave to you. Maybe this isn't the way she wanted to be remembered. And maybe now, as you say a prayer that she's safe in the afterlife and that she's happy and that she's at rest, you keep warm memories of her. And you think to yourself that she at least be at peace and she be around you as you remember her and put her to rest. I know it's small comfort. Whenever you lose somebody in a tragedy, it's small comfort to think that at least now they don't have to deal with the ill will of this world. But at least you can think, at least they're not still dealing with it. At least now they're at rest. And if you have a strong spiritual background, you know they've gone on to a greater reward. Now, those of you who are atheists in the listening audience, and I know I have some, are probably thinking that's a fairy tale. And I get that. You're entitled to have that opinion. I myself tend to think that when we leave this world, at least there's that reward. And if we leave it in a rough way, hopefully there's a little bit more of a reward. Maybe we've grown our souls just that little bit more than everybody else. That's what I'm hoping. I didn't have words from my friend today, words that would have brought much comfort. I was just as much as in shock as she was. I wish I would have. I wish I would have been a better friend today. That's all I can say. I hope you're a better friend to whoever it is that's in your life this weekend. That's what I will say. Definitely go out and be a light in someone's darkness today, tomorrow, this weekend. And when you come back next week, boy, will we have a great week of shows. I should say weekend. It's going to be an extended weekend for some. It's going to be an extended week for some because next week is the 4th of July. We'll have all new shows for you next week. Because after all, on this show, we don't want to forget that there are some people who don't have people during the holiday. So we'll be here for you. We'll have brand new shows for you next week. We'll have a brand new True Crime Tuesday for you. We'll also have a brand new Darkness Radio for you. A rather controversial True Crime Tuesday and a rather controversial Darkness Radio for you next week. So we'll have some good stuff for you to listen to next week because we want to be there for our family. So there you go. We'll see you next week for the best in true crime and the best in paranormal talk radio. You're listening to Darkness Radio.